You may have seen recently that there have been a few people on the internet saying that they can read 100 books in a single day. And the whole internet kind of collectively turned their head and went, that's not possible, actually. And this one girl said, oh, but it is. Simple hack, she uses AI to summarize the books into these 5-minute digestible chunks, and then she just reads 100 of them in a single day. Jail! And you know what letters you can't spell jail without? AI. This got me thinking about books. I mean, I'm kind of always thinking about books, but I was thinking specifically about the books you could just never summarize with AI. Like, you could just never do them justice. And then I realized that's pretty much every book. Like, it isn't possible to capture the ethos or the mood or the atmosphere of the novel with a simple plot summary. Because why? Why would you want to do that? But today, to provide a kind of antidote to all of that conversation, I wanted to talk about the books that I have read recently that I think are just so brilliant, so immersive, so gorgeously descriptive or innovative in terms of style, in terms of form, in terms of the tone of voice, the storytelling, the setting, the ideas, the character studies, that a simple plot summary just could not do it justice. Because these aren't books that you read for the plot. You know, you could bullet point out what happens in these books and the list would not be very long. These are books you kind of read for the vibes, for the pure artistry of it all, something that AI could never do. These are the kind of books that change the way you see the world, that are thought-provoking, that are galvanizing, that boggle your brain. They kind of leave you with like a book hangover after you finish reading them, because it's so cathartic, that purge of emotions. You're like, where do we go from here? You know? Starting with the one and only 24 karat gold Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy. This is like the mother of all motherhood novels. I think that there are, of course, a lot of novels that detail this life-changing, paradigm-shifting act of becoming a parent, specifically becoming a mother. But this one, I am declaring the mother of motherhood novels. This is the Cate Blanchett of motherhood novels. The mother in this book, who calls herself Soldier, is addressing her son, who she refers to as Sailor. She's documenting her anxieties, her vexations about how the world dismisses the physical and emotional labor of mothers, despite the immense burden bequeathed upon them. We follow her through every gritty detail, like you really live it moment by moment. And that's what I mean when I say that AI just could not do this justice, because you have to follow her line by line, page by page, chapter by chapter, to truly understand her worldview and what she's going through and the kind of struggles that weigh down on her every day and then eventually explode. And you know, while I think that mothers would find this book affirming and validating, I also feel like the world would be a better and far more empathetic place if it was propped into every single person's hands. Like, I think everyone should read this. Especially as a male reader, you know, it made me squirm to see the unfair division of labor between this woman and her husband. And, you know, I think that's precisely the point. It is meant to make you squirm. This soldier is facing the domestic front line entirely by herself. And it makes you feel the frustration that she feels. It makes you want to scream. And we kind of go through the motions. When her baby is born, she feels inept and incapable of caring after something so delicate and small and precious. But as their journey develops, she discusses her anxiety, her frustration, her resentment. And, you know, we really go through the motions with her. And though this book can feel dark and claustrophobic and intense, it is also imbued with comedy. That is something that Irish authors just do so immaculately well, finding the levity in moments of turmoil. Sometimes things are just so absurd that the only way to cope with them is to zoom out and laugh. I think that Claire Kilroy handles the heavy emotions of this book with expert precision. Sticking with her to the point of discomfort is precisely the point of this book. And like I said, I think everyone should read it. That's Soldier Sailor. Next, I want to talk about Stoner. This is not the book you maybe are expecting it to be. It is not about drugs. It's actually a campus novel, and it's really, really gorgeous. When I wrote my Substack review of this book, which I will link down below, I've been writing on Substack, and I'm absolutely loving it, being able to kind of expand on my thoughts on books even more. But when I wrote my Substack article about John Williams' Stoner, I titled it Living for the Hope of It All. it is August after all. But the point is, William Stoner's life is characterized more by failure than success. His marriage lacks intimacy, his career is stifled by a vindictive colleague, his closest friend is killed on the front line, his relationship with his child becomes estranged, even his love affair goes awry. On the surface, it's a sequence of miseries, like a bracelet where every single bead is cursed. And yet our eponymous hero, William Stoner, persists. And he persists, and he persists, and he persists, to the point where persists doesn't even feel like a real word anymore. And you as the reader observe his life from beginning to end. Like, the novel opens with us being told that he dies, and that his students and his colleagues don't really remember him that well, aside from as a kind of cautionary tale. And then you go back to the beginning and hear about his entire life. Kind of, you're this sort of silent voyeur watching him, and the one thing that he holds on to is hope. He has this kind of stoic perseverance, living for the hope of it all, or maybe in spite of it all. The way I would describe this book is that it describes 4 love affairs in William Stoner's life, the first of which is literature. And as a book lover, this just like scratched something inside my brain. It was so good and kind of reaffirming of like why I love reading so much. William Stoner goes to university to study agriculture because he's grown up on a farm. He wants to learn the best tricks of the trade so he can go back to his family farm and practice what he's learnt at university. But while he's there, he takes a module in literature, and when confronted with one of Shakespeare's sonnets, he just falls head over heels in love with the written word. He has this tutor who's really wonderful. He ends up switching his major to literature. He spends his days in the library, feeling nourished and sustained by reading, and he does so until his dying day. There's this really wonderful quote that I want to read. So this is him talking about falling in love with reading. The true, the good, the beautiful. They're just around the corner, in the next corridor. They're in the next book, the one you haven't read, or in the next stack, the one you haven't got to. But you'll get to it someday. And when you do, so good. If you want to be reminded why you love reading, read this book. And then the other affair that is written about so incredibly that there's almost like this electric current running through the pages as you're reading them is an actual love affair with this woman called Catherine, who's essentially kind of one of his sort of colleague, she's sort of a student, but the writing will just totally blow your mind. I cannot recommend Stoner enough. Okay, this book is called The Woman in the Dunes. This is a kind of Japanese modern classic, and the way I would describe this is what would happen if claustrophobia wrote a novel. Basically, we follow an entomologist, I think that's the right word, who studies insects, and it's kind of like a Franz Kafka meets Misery by Stephen King, because he's on the beach looking at his bugs, and the sun is starting to set, but he's not finished with his research. So he asks a local person if he can stay in her house. She says yes. He stays there, and at night, she spends the entire night brushing the roof because all this sand is blowing onto the building. So after staying there for a few days, one morning he wakes up, and the entire house has basically been like absorbed into the sand, and they're in this big pit where the house is in essentially a hole, and he realizes that the local people have removed the ladder that would help him out of this hole. He is being held hostage, essentially. It's like a nightmare that you just can't get out of and that you can't stop reading. This sand is sort of ever encroaching. There's the risk of an absolutely agonizing death, essentially of like suffocation by sand. So much suspense. It also feels incredibly existential. You know, you really feel his panic, and also he's kind of freaked out too. Like, why the hell is this happening to me? And you're with him every step of the way. And this is what I mean when I say that an AI summary of like man gets stuck in hole just wouldn't do justice to how tense and stressful it is. You know, I was breaking a sweat reading from this man's perspective. And I will say, I did learn the hard way that this, although it is set on a beach, is not necessarily a beach read. I Googled books set on the beach, and this came up, and I think that's evidence that a quick summary won't quite capture the essence of a novel. Thoroughly enjoyed it, but while sitting surrounded by sand, quite stressful, not gonna lie. Now we have to talk about The Emperor of Gladness by Ocean Vuong, who is one of our few literary rock stars that we have right now, I think, and one of the most exciting voices in fiction. When poets write fiction, some sort of literary alchemy happens, and that is what this is the product of. It's set in the pre-industrial town of East Gladness in Connecticut, which is based on the real-life town of East Hartford. East Hartford was a town riddled by the opioid epidemic. This was a crisis caused by the overprescribing of opioids for pain management, and people just got totally addicted to them. It caused a lot of overdoses and 600,000 deaths in North America. So we meet a boy called Hai. He is addicted to pills. He's 19 years old, and his lover has just had a fatal overdose. When we meet him, he is standing on the edge of a bridge. He's ready to jump. And the novel's opening line is, "The hardest thing in the world is to live only once." Suddenly, he hears the shout of an elderly woman, and so he steps down to investigate, and she's basically this widow living alone. She is suffering with dementia, which is getting increasingly worse. And she is a Lithuanian refugee who moved to the US from Lithuania, fleeing the Second World War. Takes him into her house. She shows him this kind of sorrow-releasing ritual, I suppose, where they crush bread rolls into the mud, and actually it does help. They end up forming an unlikely friendship, and it is beautiful to watch unfold and see the cultural exchange between two immigrants in America. You know, Hai is a Vietnamese immigrant, and he calms Gretzina, who is the older lady, when she's having this sort of hallucination, and she's really panicking. He soothes her by singing a Vietnamese folk song that his grandma used to sing to him. And so seeing this kind of exchange of culture is really, really special in a world that is trying to tell us we should avoid that at all costs. Actually, it's beautiful. Through his younger cousin Sonny, he procures a job at Home Market, which is kind of based on Boston Market. It's a fast food restaurant chain. And while he's there, he meets this vibrant cast of characters who discuss their grievances and their fears. They speculate about life's greatest mysteries, bound by nothing but the fact that they all work in the same tiny kitchen. And in a way, that's a great equalizer. All of these people have come to the same place with the same goal: to work, to earn money, and to make the customers satisfied. It's also a great neutralizer because they're there to perform that service. Their past and their history and everything that's ever gone wrong, or their trauma, is sort of irrelevant in this space where they're just there for a specific purpose. Those things, everything that has ever befallen you, remains on the shelf while you work your shift. And I think it's really interesting to watch a depiction of shift work that is as real and as human and as authentic as it is poetic. You are right there in the kitchen with Hai and his colleagues. You know, you're right there in the restaurant. And I think this book, The Emperor of Gladness, is testament to the fact that literature does not have to take place always in battlefields, political chambers, or royal courts. Literature can take place in restaurants, in fast food chains, in nail salons, in drive-thrus, in hairdressers, in mail rooms. All of these places are worthy of the dignity of documentation. They should be written about. What happens in these understated venues is just as important as what happens in the palaces of kings and queens or the parliaments of politicians. And if the literary elitists resent that, it's because they're more interested in gatekeeping literature and what literature can be, rather than truly striving to capture the human spirit and the human condition accurately on the page. In its myriad iterations, Vong refers to these people as the little people who make the world turn. And I think to deny those people, to deny them space in literature, is to deny the truth, is to deny the real world. And I'm glad that Ocean Vong doesn't do that. He gives them this platform. He makes their lives literary and also poetic. And really, it's a book about what we can do for one another. On the final page, Hai's mother kind of gives this like thesis statement for the entire novel. This isn't a spoiler. I think it just frames the book really nicely. She says, "Don't be afraid of life, son. Life is good when we do good things for each other." And that's what The Emperor of Gladness is. It's a tale about what we can do for one another, even when our altruism has no reward. In this book, no one expects to get out and no one does. It's not a book about social mobility. There is nowhere to go. It's also not a story about changing anything. It's about making the best of what you have and who you are. It's about doing good things for each other for the sake of goodness. And I think that's important. And for me, the reason I don't think AI could ever summarize this accurately is because it is so ornate and embellished on a granular level. You know, there are these stunning metaphors and analogies, and there's so much imagery just bursting at the seams from this book. Ocean Vong's style is almost Baroque in a way, like that's how ornate it is. And I think that's a really special thing. He's a very sentimental, sincere writer, and you need to read it, you know, line by line to get that, to truly appreciate it. And so, good luck, AI. Good luck trying to beat Ocean Vuong. You can't. This is like final boss. I, of course, also wanted to talk about Evenings and Weekends. This is a book that I've been spending a lot of time with over the last month and a half because I set up my book club. It's called Inklings. Even the name Inklings is meant to allude to ink, you know, human art, ink on a page. An inkling, the kind of start of an idea. And this book gave me such a big surface area for discussion. That's why I chose it for the book club, because there's so much to think about here. Maybe the basic summary would be that this is a love letter to London with a huge ensemble cast of characters. But the great thing is there are no villains. It's a real exercise in empathy because you understand each character, why they do what they do. You know, there's a guy who is a drug dealer, and later on in the novel you see him rescue a toad. You see these people's fundamental humanity. It's set during a heat wave, which I think really elevates the intensity of the novel. Again, it makes you feel very claustrophobic, like people are just a little bit too close to you. And I think it's excellent. There are so many wonderful quotes, wonderful moments, and seeing people engage with this in the book club on Fable, because basically we have this on the Fable app, you can discuss based on whichever chapter you have got to. So if you're on chapter 5, you can discuss with all the other people who are also on chapter 5. If you're on chapter 7, you discuss with everyone on chapter 7. Chapter 12, you discuss with everyone on chapter 12. And so I've been able to watch as other people have fallen in love with one of my favorite books of all time. It was amazing because everyone found something different that to them was the most striking part about the book, because this has a really big cast of characters, right? Everyone is going through their own crisis, their own dilemma. A mother needs to tell her son she has cancer. A woman has got pregnant and isn't sure if she's ready to settle down and be a mother. There are queer relationships coming out. There are people in open relationships. There's a wedding. There's also a whale stuck in the river and a woman reporting on it who looks a lot like Princess Diana. And so people call her the Princess of Wales. Just so much texture, so much going on that every page is such a treat. And I think you got to walk with it. I think you got to take every page as it comes and consider it in detail. And that's why it was a great book club pick and why I think AI could never do this book justice. Evenings and Weekends, get behind me. I will protect this book with my life. And if you do want to be part of the Inklings book club, I will leave the links to the Fable book club down below, as well as the Instagram where I post kind of discussion points, things to consider as you read. And I'm just about to announce book number 2. So stay tuned for that. It's a corker. Oh, and I'll leave the link to my new book podcast where I'll be interviewing authors, starting with Oisin McKenna, with our book club discussion. Fight the system, fight AI, join book clubs, please. Before I tell you about the next book, I have to tell you about something wonderful that uses AI in the way that AI should be used to help us rather than to kind of stifle artistic endeavors, and that is Squarespace. So Squarespace is an all-in-one platform for building a website. Whether you want to make a blog or an online store, you can use Squarespace, who do not require any coding experience or expert web design skills. They actually have hundreds of templates that you can use and customize and make something that is completely your own. Whether you want to share your writing, your book reviews, you want to sell books, whatever it is, you can make that happen with Squarespace. And the great way that Squarespace uses AI for kind of like a non-evil use is they have AI SEO. So search engine optimization basically just helps people to find your website. So you do all the cool creative stuff and then Squarespace just helps it get discovered. Your customers can have flexible payments. You can build a blog, a website sign-up list. Basically, anything you can imagine is possible with Squarespace. So if all of this sounds good, you can head to squarespace.com right now for a free trial and then use my code jackedwards at squarespace.com/jackedwards to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you, Squarespace, for working with me on this video. Next, we have Parade by Rachel Cusk. Now, for me, it's kind of a ritual that once every year, I read a Rachel Cusk book. And I've been waiting for this one to come out in paperback for so long, but it's finally here. It's in my hands. I've read it. I adored it. And this to me felt like the antidote to the barrage of generative AI that we are now encountering on a day-to-day basis. Like every time you go online, you are bombarded by it. And so to sit with this, to linger on this, you know, it's a difficult book. There's that really great article in defense of difficult books, which I really recommend everyone reading because it talks about the intrinsic value of just slowing down and poring over a novel and taking it line by line, page by page, and picking up something that isn't straightforward, that isn't easy. Because I do think there are, you know, different books have different purposes, right? And you can read something that is very didactic and explains every emotion, sort of tells you what to think. Those books have a purpose, and often those are comforting and satisfying to read. This one is tough to really kind of wade through, but I think that's the beauty of it. It talks about lots of different artists. I think there's about 6 different artists, and they're all individually referred to as G, just the letter G. The best way I can explain this is to talk about Ursula K. Le Guin's carrier bag theory. So if you don't know what the carrier bag theory is, basically it is a way of looking at human history. So the traditional way that we think about the earliest tools that human had would be the spear, something that you could hunt with. But actually, it's much more realistic when we think about human history that the earliest tools would have been shells or gourds or bags, something you could gather things in, something you could contain things in, like a vessel that was bigger than what your human hands could carry. And you can apply this idea to narrative structures as well. So a linear narrative is kind of like a spear. A spear follows a linear path towards its target. That's its trajectory. Probably like a typical hero novel. We get from A to B and there's resolution there. That's the kind of format of the typical sort of like thriller books that your dad buys at an airport on the way to holiday. You know, most romance books and fantasy books will also follow that structure, as will romantasy, the fusion of the two. And so just as in the West we read from left to right, these books traditionally move through time in a sequential, continuous fashion, beginning, middle, and end. There's a narrative drive. Will the hero emerge victorious? Will the boy get the girl? Will the mystery be solved? Meanwhile, the carrier bag theory is more like a jumbled mess of things. A carrier bag narrative is no plot, just vibes. It's disorderly, it's not neatly laid out, but tangled together. I mean, if you have a tote bag, you know what it's like to reach in to try to find your keys and everything is just all over the place. That's kind of what reading this book is like, but in the best possible way. Carrier bag stories are, of course, most commonly found in literary fiction. And so without a rigid narrative structure, these books are able to meander and wander, and the author is able to ponder and ruminate. The author carves themselves that space. And I've dropped the book. The author carves that space where they're able to contradict themselves, change their mind, and make insightful observations about existence, society, personhood. There's also no clearly defined heroes in these books, meaning that the characters can be fallible and flawed like real people are. Lots of different protagonists might be presented, each with equal merit and equal value and equal importance in a sort of cauldron of creativity, I guess. This book is all about human art. It covers a variety of things. A woman is attacked in the street and renegotiates her entire attitude to life. You know, it's this complete shift where suddenly she sees every person as a potential attacker. So there's so much to unpack here. There's lots to think about. Like I said, it's a book that you move through slowly. Cusk has this kind of austere, unsentimental, and unapologetic style of writing, continuing to challenge the expectations that we have of novels, even hers, because she's always been an experimental writer. These are 4 kind of loosely connected vignettes, almost like a gallery of ideas in a way. It's like stepping into a room with 4 individual paintings that maybe have some sort of vague style or color palette in common, but they're individually striking as individual pieces as much as they are as a collective whole. I think this, feels like the novel equivalent of walking into a gallery. If all that sounds good, I would definitely recommend starting with Outline by Rachel Cusk, which I think does have a little bit more kind of narrative structure. This one is definitely for the Cusk lovers, but I really enjoyed it. So I recommend Cusk, but I also recommend what could be considered carrier bag fiction. In general, books that are no plot, just vibes, books that really linger and think about what it is to be human. The final book that I wanted to talk about today is So Long, See You Tomorrow. Still emotionally recovering from this one, not gonna lie. So I first heard about this book because I was actually on a TV show, Mental, speaking about evenings and weekends, and one of the other guests was Graham Norton. Yes, I am going to pick that name up off the floor. I did just drop Graham Norton's name, but he was sitting next to me and he recommended this book. The way he described it, I was like, sold. Say no more. I'm on my way to the bookshop. I need a copy of this book. And so here it is. This is a quiet and underrated modern classic that demands to be read and read again. It's only 153 pages. It's a very slim volume, but I think proof that greatness can be concise. Ostensibly simple prose can speak to the very depths of your soul. Unembellished writing can be jaw-dropping. subtlety can be profound. And that's what this book is to me. It's set on the farmlands of Illinois, where these two boys, their lives collide over a couple of unremarkable days spent in each other's company when they're young. But both of these two boys face unimaginable tragedy in their lives. For one boy, that has just happened. His mother has died in the flu epidemic, and he is in the throes of grief. He's kind of our narrator. For the other boy, the worst is yet to come. Basically, his father, Clarence, kills his best friend and then completely disappears, and it's all to do with an affair, and it just causes a rupture in his son's life, of course. At this point, when the two boys meet, though, the narrator says, I didn't tell Cletus about my shipwreck, and he didn't tell me about his. And yet they are united in some way, in this sort of quiet devastation that they both feel. Each boy has had joy ripped from his life through no fault of his own. This is something that has happened to him, something he has no agency in, and they have to now navigate a new reality, sort of untethered from what they've always known. So Long See You Tomorrow does this really precious thing that great novels do, where it feels perennial and modern despite being written so long ago. It was first published almost 50 years ago and set 50 years before that, and yet I, reading it in 2025, resonated with so many of the emotions and found it so pertinent and relevant to read. The emotions are just so raw and honest and evergreen. It will break your heart into tiny little shards, because ultimately it's this kind of epic story of resilience and human frailty, meandering through life's melancholies and mourning the transience of existence. So that's depressing, but also I can't recommend it enough. So that is So Long, See You Tomorrow. And that concludes my list of book racks for you today. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you would consider picking one of these up. I think they are so wonderful. My full reviews are over on my Substack. It's called Constant Reader. I'll leave it linked down below. It's an homage to Dorothy Parker, who was this amazing literary critic in the 1920s. I mean, I could never even hold a torch to her, but I'm doing my best and sharing my thoughts on the things that I'm reading. So if you would like to read those reviews, I will link it down below along with my book club. It sort of feels like the ultimate resistance right now to sit down with a book and read it page by page rather than some stupid AI summary. And I will, of course, continue to champion this precious literary space that we have. So thank you for being here. Thank you for championing books and being interested in them, being fascinated, wanting to continue to read art by human beings. We have to keep prioritizing that. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed this video. It's actually been a while since I filmed, but it's nice to be back. Hope I wasn't too rusty, but thank you for being here. Love you to the moon and back, and I will catch you very, very soon. Bye-bye.